like, oh, these deep longings that I have and these things that I want people to feel, like at the end of the day, only Jesus is gonna feel that. Yeah, and it's not gonna be with my husband either. He can't like carry the weight of all of that pressure and expectation. I went through this healing and I was like in this different place, and I wasn't so desperate for like my girlfriends to fill this void in me. And so I think one of the key things that I'm looking for in friendships, particularly with other women, is when something good is happening to me, whether it's an accomplishment or something that I'm realizing about myself, I want to know, are they celebrating with me?
Oh, that's so good.
Do I see that joy in their eyes when I'm talking about something that's good that's happening to me?
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer.
I'm Natasha. And I'm Tiffany.
And welcome to In the Middle. Today we're going to talk about community and the power of it. Our world is at an all-time high of loneliness, of depression. And why is that? So we brought an expert to us today. We have Cindy Park. She is a licensed professional counselor associate with Lifeology. Welcome, Cindy. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we have been waiting for this, just this talk with you. And I want to go back to where you came from. I know you're from California, so let's talk about the transition that brought you to Texas.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California almost like my entire life. Met my husband in college, we raised our kids there, and then about 10 years ago, we really felt called that God was calling us to Texas for my husband's job. So he's a pastor, it's great. We moved out here. I spent my 40th birthday here. We moved out October 3rd or 10th or something. My birthday's on the 22nd. Spent my 40th birthday just with my family, and it was probably the loneliest 40th birthday party ever. And that painted a picture, sadly, of what the next many years were going to be like, because I was not prepared for what a hard transition it was going to be to pick up my whole family and my entire life and move across the country. And in some ways, we felt like we were moving to a completely different place. Somehow it really felt so different from California. And so
You're saying Texas, different than California.
what? And so I'm really excited to talk about this friendship and loneliness and the difficulty of that, because I just think it's a pain point for us as adult women that we don't often talk about.
Yes, and I love your heart and your passion to really help equip women with the tools and knowledge to truly be able to cultivate a healthy community. And there's a lot that we have in common, because I recently moved here to Texas. It'll be 2 years in May. And we were just talking about how it really takes time to find your people. And it's been 2 years for me, and I'm still kind of on the struggle bus of who are those key people. So I'd love for you to just talk about how did it feel having to come to a completely new state and rebuild again? Because it sounds like your community in California was very rich and it was very healthy. So how did that look like with transitioning here to Texas and building that community?
Yeah, I was not prepared for how difficult it was going to be. And so we grew up in I grew up in Southern California. My husband did too for most of his life. And so we had year-long friendships there, people that we had done community with. We gave birth at the same time. We raised our kids together, and that naturally builds in a lot of community, because you're doing play dates and you're going to kids' birthday parties and all that. And so we were at a much smaller church. It was a really tight-knit community. And so friendship and relationships came to me, not just came easily, but we're so there, we're so accessible. And so I just thought, I know how to be a friend. I know what it's going to be like, and I'm going to do the same thing when I get to Texas. It's going to be fine. And it was shockingly different because the friendships weren't there and weren't as accessible. And I went through an incredibly lonely wrestling period with God, because I felt so sure that this is where we were supposed to be, that God had called us to Texas. So it's not like I felt like we had made a mistake or we could even go back. That didn't feel like an option, because we're supposed to be here. But I wrestled with God so much. If you are calling us here, why is it so hard for me? Why am I so lonely? Because then on the flip side, I was watching my husband, and he's on staff at church, and it just felt like he was making friends like by leaps and bounds, and he just felt super connected, and I just felt really like isolated by myself. And so it was really difficult and really challenging.
Can you walk us through what it looked like for you to build that community in Texas? Like, when did you start to see the shift as the Lord exposed to your heart? Like, this is what's lacking, and you kind of were able to look inward to see like the things that you needed and what you wanted in community once you were here. Where did you see that shift begin?
Yeah, I think it started like really like slowly. When I convinced myself that all the moms in Texas were PTA moms, and so I was like, that's what I'm going to do.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to join the PTA, and I should have known myself better, because I am not a PTA mom.
Me either.
Because PTA moms, I feel like, are just so like faithful and so available and love to like just serve and be at the school and help out and do all the things. And I'm an introvert, and so I gain energy like by myself, honestly. And so the idea of being at all these events and in the classroom and doing all these things, it was just like an energy drain for me.
Right.
So I should have paid better attention to that. And so once I realized, oh, okay, that's probably not going to be the place where I find my people, because we're just wired really differently. I had to be more intentional about looking at who was in my proximity and then putting myself out there a little bit, because that's really hard, like to be vulnerable and to be like proactive, right?
So with that, I have a question. With the loneliness you mentioned, but then also putting yourself out there while you're still struggling with loneliness, while you're also struggling with, God, did you really say? And I know you love your husband and you support him, but why is his life flourishing and mine's not? And we're a team. How did you wrestle with that, and also being able to put yourself out there in the midst?
Yeah, I love that, because it's really like about holding space for both those things, about both like the hard and like the glimmers of hope and the good things like at the same time. And I think that when any of us in any stage of our life, when we can create space to hold both of those things, that's when we get like the most peace, instead of, well, it must be this, or if not that, like instead of being black and white. But I did really have to wrestle with God and come to kind of the end of myself in terms of like relationships and what I wanted, and really come to kind of breaking point of realizing, oh, all these like, I'm going to say something that I don't want it to be like discouraging, but like, oh, these deep longings that I have and these things that I want people to feel, like at the end of the day, only Jesus is going to feel that. Yeah, and it's not going to be with my husband either. He can't like carry the weight of all of that pressure and expectation. So it's not going to be Peter. It's not going to be like my girlfriend. It's not going to be, it's really me and Jesus. And so that's part of like what I had to really like accept. And I didn't have to face that before in California, because all my relationships were there. And so that was just not a thing that was on the forefront of my mind. So it was that, me wrestling with that. And then also, but realizing, okay, there is that, but I do feel lonely for friendships. And so I didn't want to just sit there in that and just be in that. So constantly like figuring out, well, who can I try friendship? Who can I like test the waters out? I said, because I'm an introvert, I am like more shy. And so one of my closest friends now, the way that we became close friends was because several years ago, I'd known her, and like we'd interacted a little bit, and I was like, I think I want to be friends with her. But I wasn't brave enough to say like, hey, do you want to get coffee or something? And so I remember it was Galentine's Day, so February 13th. And so I'm like, this is an easy way. So I went and dropped something off at her door. And I just texted her, and I was like, hey, I just dropped something off for you. That same Galentine's, I dropped something off at 4 other women's houses. Like 4 other women that I was like, okay, I'd like to be friends with them. I'd like to see. And she was the only one that responded with an invitation. The other women, they were grateful, and it was like awesome. But she was like, hey, do you want to meet her for coffee? I'm like, yes, I do. I do want to meet you for coffee. That's right. And so, that's how we became friends.
And that's one of the key things that I believe a lot of women struggle with when it comes to reaching out, is that fear of rejection.
Yes.
Right? And it's just like, if you've been rejected multiple times, maybe you gave it a good try. You texted them, you called them, you supported them, but it didn't end up in the way that you thought it would. So what would be your wisdom and advice to a woman that may have been rejected multiple times and they're too afraid, to try again, to find a friend?
I would say, and we were talking a little bit before we before this show about like the reality of like friendship breakups and the heartbreak of friendships and how hard that is. And we don't talk about that a lot because we talk a lot about like romantic breakups and, you know, like when things don't go the way that we hope in like romantic relationships, we're like, oh, you know, here's a pint of ice cream, or, you know, let's go and we'll watch, you know, binge watch Netflix together. We'll hang out, we'll do all the things, and we'll, you know, like we'll grieve together. Yeah. But when friendships are disappointing or friendships are heartbreaking, we're just kind of like, well, just make a new friend, or don't you have other friends? And we don't really talk about how hard that is.
Right.
So I think part of it is if you have been rejected in friendships, like to acknowledge like it's really, really painful. And it's a really hard place to be. Instead of like dismissing it, or instead of being like, well, let me just, you know, pull myself up and, you know, go find somebody else. And just to acknowledge that part, right? Like, don't you guys think like,
absolutely,
if you guys have been like in friendship breakups, like, or like hard places in friendships, like how has that been for you guys?
Yeah.
It's been hard for me personally because I've moved, you know, multiple times in my marriage. We moved like 2 times. So it was rebuilding all over again. And for me, since I have friends in different states and we have to stay in contact through like Marco Polo or voice messages, it's harder to kind of keep that relational piece going. So for me, I've had to come to the conclusion of where I'm at right now and give myself permission to look at the relationship through a different lens. And also, like, I love how you were just even sharing practical tips of recognizing how you gave that gift to multiple women, and there was one in particular who stood out. So I think even for me, of being brave enough to recognize who is in my life right now, who am I showing up for, who is showing up for me, and kind of being brave enough to take that evaluation and then move from there. Because I think it can be hard to be honest with yourself, especially if you've had a lot of good memories with them and they've been with you through hard moments. You kind of feel bad for viewing the friendship through a different lens. So even like, how do you communicate that to someone, right? If you're in a relationship that you've known each other for a long time, but maybe like distance has changed things, how would you advise somebody to approach their friend again, to kind of restart it again? Like, how do you know when it's okay, like to begin again in the relationship or to kind of let it go?
Yeah. One thing really quick I want to touch on is social media portrays that like we have our ride or dies. Like we're going to have those girls and I have them, and like, look how awesome they are. And so if you don't have it, there's something wrong with you and you should feel like deficient. And I think it's pretty like a rare thing. I think it's a really special thing to find that. And if we don't have that like right now, to acknowledge like the loss of that, like the desire for that, and also to acknowledge it, maybe it won't be that way forever.
Right.
If you had asked me a year or 2 in Texas, I would be like, I have 0 ride or dies here. Like there's nobody. Like, and I think it's going to be like this forever. It's not like year 10. I feel differently, but to acknowledge that if you don't have that, if you're like longing for a community, it's okay to say like, man, I wish I had that.
Yeah. And don't you think too that there's quote unquote ride or dies for different seasons of life? So like there were friends that when I had babies and they also had babies, we were together a lot during the week because our husbands would be at work, we'd do these little play dates. And then now that my kids are in school, I've got different friends that, you know, I might connect with, even just in my season of widowhood. I've got a couple of friends who are also single moms. It's not to take away from the moms, you know, friends that I had when my babies were babies, but we are just in different seasons. And so we have, or I know I have longtime friends. I mean, friends that I've had since I was a little girl. I'll always love them, but I feel like we can connect at different seasons with different people. And so giving even our friends grace, because I know I've been hard on my friends at times for not meeting expectations that I had. And I had to look inward and see, okay, that's a you thing and not a them thing. Because sometimes we put our pain, our hurt, our expectations on other people when, like you said, we need to turn and realize that, okay, number one, only the Lord can meet those needs. But he has given us the need and the desire for friendship. And it makes me think of that scripture, there's a brother, or there's a friend that is closer than a brother. Like friendship is important to the Lord. And so acknowledging that, but also knowing it can't take the place of the Lord, you know, but different seasons for sure. Different seasons, different friends.
I want to know about your transition to Texas and then becoming a counselor associate in with Lifeology. I want to know about that transition, and then even that step and combining with your husband being a pastor, what do you see as just one of the main struggles, multiple struggles of people? I mean, because I know we're talking about just ours, but on the in your office and things like that, what is a common thing you're running into?
Yeah. So actually this journey of like kind of being like lonely was part of my counseling journey.
Wow.
And so the reason that I went to therapy, and so here I am just laying it all out. But the reason that I went to counseling in the first place was because I would look at social media and be like, all these people are living these amazing lives with these amazing connections, and there's something wrong with me. So I think I have the sin of jealousy. So let me talk to a therapist so we can address this sin of jealousy. I thought he was going to tell me to join an accountability group and, you know, like here are these 10 steps about how you overcome jealousy. Only to find that it wasn't, jealousy was not my core issue. The hurt and the brokenness and stuff that I was feeling was from stuff that I had like thought that I had dealt with from long ago in, you know, childhood and stuff like that, that was still like unprocessed. And so I went into this journey of counseling, and part of what I had to address in counseling is I'm so lonely here. I don't have friends and I don't understand. I know how to be a good friend. I had good friends, but why is it such a struggle here? And so it was through counseling that my therapist really helped me to see like, hey, this emptiness in your heart is, even though I love Jesus, even though I had gone to seminary and done all the things, had been in ministry, that there was this last little piece that I thought, well, surely other people can fill this. And it was only through the safety of counseling that he was like, that place is just for Jesus. And so so that was part of it, and it really transformed my life. I think that's probably what helped me to make the friendships that I have now, is because I went through this healing and I was like in this different place, and I wasn't so desperate for like my girlfriends to fill this void in me. And so I counseling did that for me. And so when that happened, I was like, counseling's changed my life. Obviously, Jesus had changed my life in a transformative way, but counseling had this huge impact. And I'm like, I want to do this. I want to do this for other people. And so, so then I just made like a midlife career change. Like when we were in California, my husband was doing ministry then too. And so I thought, I'm going to come out to Texas and I'm going to do the same thing. And so I thought my whole life was going to be in ministry. And then because of counseling in the journey, I was like, oh, actually, I don't think I'm going to do ministry anymore. And went,
well, it's its own type of ministry.
Yes, true. Not in the church ministry. So then I have gone into counseling, but even still in talking to Peter and in the clients that I see now, I think that one of the biggest struggles is that the enemy tells us that you're alone. You're the only one. That's what the enemy was telling me for sure. I was the only one that was feeling lonely. I was the only one that didn't have ride or die friends. I was the only one that was feeling, like this way, other. And that's what he tells so many of us. You're the only single mom. You're the only single person. You're the only person that, wants like recognition or whatever in this way. So there's something wrong and broken with you. And now like, one of the advantages of being in ministry or seeing a bunch of clients is I hear that same story over and over and over. And if I could put everybody in a room and be like, no, you're not the only one. See how many other people have that in common. So that would be the thing I think that is the most common issue that I like, that the most common thing that my clients have.
And I just love the work that you're doing, because not just, even in the church, it's also important, because I know for me, there were moments to where I felt rejected in the church, right? Because it was just like, these group of people, like they do that together and X, Y, and Z. But I think being able to realize that it's not just in the body of Christ, it's just human nature. It's in our humanity, right? We're all longing for a connection. And you did mention something that I would love for you to like quickly talk about, but what would be your definition of a good friend?
And this actually makes me think of a question, Natasha, that you asked me earlier that I don't think I answered, is what happens when we are like feeling like rejected? And so how do we respond to that? And so I think part of that is understanding like who we are and making decisions based on our values and having friendships based on our values and like, but that takes like a tremendous amount of like self-awareness. I think in those first probably like 6, years of being in Texas, I was just desperate for any kind of connection. And so I was just like grasping at straws. And so like, you just look at me in the eye. Okay, this is my best friend now. And so I had to like recognize like, oh wait, what what do I want? Like,
That's good.
What's important to me? And then looking for those type of friendships. Part of like some of the rejection that I think that I experienced is because I was so desperate for it. So I would be the initiator all the time. And then the other person got comfortable with that and wasn't initiating back. And then I reached a point, I was like, wait, how come I'm the only one that's putting effort into the friendship? And that was like hurtful. And so once I stopped putting in the effort, then the friendship would fizzle away. And so I think I had to make decisions based on who am I, what type of friend do I want to be, and then what type of person will respond in a similar way.
That's so wise.
That's very wise.
It is. Because we think about that relationally, like when we're dating and, you're courting someone, do their values line up with mine? But if you've got a friend that wants to go out every weekend and party and go drink, and that's not where you're going, then that may not be a friendship that, is going to thrive. And so being able to decipher that, even in a moment of desperation, like wanting connection, to be like, okay, but I'm going to make sure that it's the right kind of connection. I think that's really wise that you were able to see that.
Yeah. And then sometimes because of life transition, sometimes because your kids are not at the same school or doing the same sports or, like whatever, or you move a little bit, friendships do naturally kind of like change. But then thinking about like, I'm always so happy when people reach out to me like, hey, I've been thinking about you. Like that always makes me feel good. And so then to like kind of get over myself and think, oh, well, what if I reach out? Like, will they feel like, no, if I'm doing it in like an easy kind of like, hey, no pressure, no expectations way, but I just want you to know I'm thinking about you and, like I miss your face or I miss, hanging out with you or whatever. Like I've never had somebody be like, well, I don't receive that. I don't want that. And then if that naturally creates like a reconnection, that's great. But otherwise, if I'm just putting good energy out there and letting people know that I miss them and I'm thinking about them, like no harm.
I love it.
Nothing's
It's
lost.
pressure free. And I think it comes back to the place of understanding God and his love for us and knowing that he ultimately feels that. So when we do give that same, love to someone else, we can know that it's coming from a pure place.
And I have a question with, you were talking about basing friendships on your values. And I know for all of us, I mean, we're born and we grow and we're learning, and who I was as a kid isn't a teen and isn't college and isn't 20s, 30s, 40s. And it's not everyone can grow together. Some people can. So how do you talk about that? Because obviously when where I went to school and church was combined. So I went to a little Christian academy, same school friends as my youth group friends, and we were just all together in one little bundle of joy, and it was awesome. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. But with that, and I know this also could be with even moving to a new place, but when we moved out of that season and now we're in colleges and separate and different things in life changes, and then even you had COVID and that changed us all to some,
all of us,
some level, right? How do you talk to people where, because I know we've grown and some people like it, some people don't, and some people get offended by your growth. And we hear about that, like the healthier you are, people get offended by that. And I remember reading that, and I was like, I don't really understand that until I experienced it. And I'm like, wait, I'm like my best self right now. Why is this bothering you so bad? How do you talk to people about how to handle that? Because I struggle with how to handle that. Because you don't want to come across prideful or better. It's just, look at what God's done in my life. And I don't know, there's a wrestle that some people have with that. How do you help us with that?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I'm looking for in friendships, particularly with other women, is when something good is happening to me, whether it's an accomplishment or something that I'm realizing about myself, I want to know, are they celebrating with me?
Oh, that's so good.
Do I see that joy in their eyes when I'm talking about something that's good that's happening to me? And so if I'm not, then that's fine. That's where they're at in their journey, and I'm moving in a different place. But then I'm not going to put my hope and my expectations in that friendship and on them in that way.
Right.
I think another thing that's really important to kind of like keep in mind as we're building friendships is Laura Tremaine is an author, and she has this book about like the counsel of your life. And so basically what she's saying is, if we were putting together a board for our company, we would be like, okay, we're going to have these different seats at the table, and these people are going to serve different roles. There's going to be a CFO and a COO and, like chief of staff and stuff like that. And so we're not expecting everyone at the table to fill all 10 of those roles that we need. And so there are friends that I have that we just talk like the deepest things of our heart. We talk about like the deep struggles and pains like in our lives or our fears that we have for our kids, like we really, really deep. And that's what that friend is there for. And then I have other friends that like, because I'm serious and I'm introverted and I'm, like I need friends that just are like funny and just make me laugh. And I don't have as many of those deep kind of conversations with her, but she fills that role of bringing joy into my life. And that's the expectation that I have. And so there are friends that just like, maybe don't fully like understand or grasp like the things that I'm learning as I've gone through this whole counseling journey. And so then I look at, well, but what does she have? What does she bring to the table? What are the great qualities about her? And then there are like some times where it's like, oh, actually, this is not a good fit. And this is not a person that I can like allow into my life and put that energy into this relationship because we're just not in the same place anymore. So sometimes we do have to make those hard decisions.
And how, can we talk about that? How, as a believer, do you make those hard decisions with the fruits of the Spirit, using boundaries, not being defensive and combative about it, but taking the right steps that's best for your life?
Yeah. I feel like boundaries is like such a difficult concept, right? I don't know if it's as difficult for men, but I feel like it's universally difficult like for women, for us to have like healthy boundaries. And so kind of the way that I'm trying to decide is I'm figuring out what am I like responsible for and thinking of boundaries as like not a fence, but as a gate. And so that gate opens and closes. And so that helps me determine like, well, what do I let in and out?
Right.
And so this person, let's just say that she is not in a place right now to like understand or empathize or, like connect with where I'm going and the health that I have. So then I realized, okay, in this place, if the response is always like negative or toxic, or if it's always like selfish, like, she doesn't care about me, or, it's not asking about me, then I'm like, okay, right now in this season, I'm going to close the gate. But I am also cautious about not wishing ill on the other person. I'm thinking about a friendship breakup that I had probably like 4 or 5 years ago. It was while we were here in Texas, and it was a really, really hard friendship breakup for me with a group of girlfriends. And I think that the friendship breakup was like fine. It was the right decision. Like we probably weren't moving in the same direction. But the way that I handled it, I regret. The way that I was just like, you don't want to be friends with, I don't want to be friends with you either then. And just kind of like spiteful. I feel like, oh, that's something that I had to like repent for and just change, that I wasn't going to do that.
And that takes maturity to do, because we're talking a lot about when other people aren't meeting our expectations, but we have to also self-reflect, like what am I doing or maybe not doing? And I know, again, for me in this season, I have seen friends that have come alongside and like wept with me. And those are, people and experiences that I'll never forget. So being able to, I've asked myself, during this season, like, would you do that? Like, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, of course. But when I've seen what it is take, the sacrifices that people have made to come alongside with me.
Sit with you in it.
Sit with you in it. Because it's great to be with a friend who's in a fun season in life. But what about the friend that's like down and out? And I mean down and out. And so being able to, of course, be with people in those happy seasons, but also the friend that can be there when the season isn't happy.
And then I just have a person, I'm like, I would love for you to write a book on this one day. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but there's not a lot of books about this. And I just feel like God is really giving you a fresh revelation and understanding of, relationships and friendships. And it's beautiful how he used your journey now to help others. I feel like I could sit and ask you a lot of questions.
I know. We're going to have you back.
Yes.
That is exactly the thing. And you're going to have your book with you. We're just going to speak it out.
It's happening.
Yeah. Well, and as we wrap up, if someone wants to, because they're going to want to connect with you, where can they go? A number and website?
Yeah, the easiest place to find me is probably on social media. My handle is Sydney Park PhD, so you can find me on Instagram or Facebook. I'd love to connect with you that way.
Is that best? That's perfect. Okay.
Sorry.
And then what do you want to leave our viewers with? What's your best nugget of counseling wisdom?
Yeah, the thing that I would want to encourage, like all of us, is to know that if you're struggling through finding friendships or you're feeling lonely, that you're not the only one. That this is a really difficult, unexpected thing that happens in like middle life that we like don't really think about. We think about it like when we're kids. And so now to find ourselves here and to feel like, oh, I'm struggling through this, there's something wrong with me, that is a lie. So you're not the only one. And then to think about like, well, what are my values? What kind of friend do I want to be? And then what kind of friendships do I want to look for? And to keep trying, because it is really difficult. It takes like a bunch of like tries and a bunch of effort to find like your friends. But don't give into the loneliness, don't isolate, just keep trying, because eventually you'll find your people.
Amen. That's such a
Or you can welcome us as your people, because we welcome you. We love you.
Yes.
This is awesome.
We just loved all of the wisdom that was shared in today's episode. So we want to make sure that you guys were also impacted. So if you can let us know down in the comments, what part of this conversation really ministered to you? How are you going to be brave in beginning to cultivate a community that you are proud of? Make sure to follow us on Instagram, on inthemiddle.tv, as well as on Facebook.
And just remember that there's laughter,
Hope,
and belonging
in the middle.
We'll see you next time. Bye.